when we think about the culinary industry, I mean, there's some finesse to searing protein and cooking protein, but there's so much more that goes into preparing beautiful, vibrant, nutrient-dense, plant-based dishes. And honestly, that is, in my opinion, much more of a skill than creating a much more standard American diet plate of like mashed potatoes, probably overcooked steak, maybe some canned green beans. It's just, that doesn't make me hungry. It doesn't make me excited about food, but plant-based cooking does.
I'm Rip Esselstyn, and welcome to the PLANTSTRONG podcast. The mission at PLANTSTRONG is to further the advancement of all things within the plant-based movement. We advocate for the scientifically proven benefits of plant-based living and envision a world that universally understands, promotes, and prescribes plants as a solution to empowering your health, enhancing your performance, restoring the environment, and becoming better guardians to the animals we share this planet with. We welcome you wherever you are on your PLANTSTRONG journey, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello, my PLANTSTRONG peaches. I'm Rip Esselstyn. Welcome to another episode of the PLANTSTRONG podcast. You have heard me say this before, and in fact, it's a quote that we say a lot on the PLANTSTRONG team, and that is, it is the food, it's the food, it is the food. This is something that I think Dr. John McDougall has been saying forever, and Dr. Michael Clapper has a quote of this on the wall in his office. Well, today, it really is all about the food with my guest, Chef Stephanie White. She is the lead chef instructor of the Escoffier School of Culinary Arts plant-based degree program. And we just got back from our latest PLANTSTRONG immersion in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And we were fortunate enough to have a couple of the Escoffier students that were assigned to us for this program. And I was just so incredibly impressed with these three interns, their knowledge, their skill, their experience, and their can-do attitude that I felt compelled to reach out and speak to the lead culinary chef instructor, who just happened to be Stephanie, who is truly a gem, who has, over the course of her career, worked in a variety of different food establishments, including small businesses, pop-up kitchens, all kinds of catering and farm-to-table restaurants. But one of the things that I love is that not only is she passionate about cooking PLANTSTRONG food, she's equally passionate about the sustainability of the food, how we can collectively end food insecurity, and also optimizing self-care. All things that we on the PLANTSTRONG team care deeply and passionately about. And today, she's going to share with us some of her favorite grains, green leafy vegetables, must-have tools and appliances for every kitchen. And she even shares a recipe for her sweet potato brownies. This is a really fun conversation with one of the most sought-after chefs in the plant-based space, and I cannot wait for you to meet Chef Stephanie. All right, my guest today is Stephanie Michalak White. Stephanie, welcome to the PLANTSTRONG podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. So your middle name, Michalak, you just told me that it was Polish. I am married to a Polish woman. Her last name is Koleszinski. Mm-hmm. Very Polish. Michalak, I never would have guessed, but you say that's like the Smith last name in Poland?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of obviously Polish last names, but a lot with ending with ski or ak. So yeah, my family is originally from the Lebatowa area of Poland. So it's like the western southern area. It's been other countries too for throughout history, but it's in Poland right now. And they actually have an area called Michalak, which is like the cove of the Michalaks, which is very jarring as an American, but it's,
yes.
So, yeah.
Well, so anybody that's watching, if you're listening, behind Stephanie, she's got this beautiful background that says all over it. Is it pronounced Auguste?
Auguste.
Or Auguste?
Auguste, yeah.
Auguste.
So, yeah.
Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. And where Stephanie, you're the lead culinary instructor for the plant-based program there.
Yeah.
Which is very, very cool, which is why I'm having you on the show, because I've never had a lead culinary chef instructor before. And I thought it'd be fascinating to find out kind of how you became a lead culinary chef instructor, your passion for plants, how that all started. So I'd love to just start out by, let's just go back to the beginning, and then doing a little research. I know that you've loved plants since you were a very little girl growing up on your grandparents' farm, where they sold raspberries and pussy willows.
Yep. Very Eastern European thing to do, right?
Yeah. So where did your grandparents have their farm?
So I grew up on the East Coast. So I was born and raised in Connecticut. So my grandmother and grandfather were in Berlin, Connecticut. So it's kind of in the middle of the state, and essentially they loved growing raspberries. So just rows and rows of it. They also grew small things for their own sustenance, like zucchini and things like that. We had a walnut tree that we used to harvest from, but mostly the raspberries were for production and selling. So a different time period where I could happily sell them on the side of the road, and it wasn't an issue. That would probably be a problem now.
Right. What exactly are pussy willows?
Yeah, so pussy willows are trees, and basically they're the buds. They look like little cotton pails. In particularly Catholic, like Easter time, you harvest just the branches. They're really beautiful as sort of an ornamental item for like tablescapes and things like that. But basically, they're twigs with little cotton balls on them. That sounds way less enticing than they actually look, but it's ornamental.
Yeah. Cool. So would you say that's where you kind of got were introduced to your love of kind of food?
Yeah, it's funny. I think about my childhood and how it kind of brought me into plant-based in a couple different ways. So my love of agriculture certainly started with my grandparents and harvesting raspberries with them, and seeing that abundance of color and flavor and just the vibrancy that happens with something that's peak and in season. It's something super magical that I think unless you have that experience and know how that's viscerally impactful to you, it's really difficult to emulate that. So for me, it's just raw produce certainly came from them. My grandmother, bless her heart, she's a terrible cook. Very, very post-depression era, cooks to everything until it's dead, died over twice, put a stick of margarine on it, and you're good to go. So it was not my most foodie time period of my life. That being said, my mother is an avid cook. She's a phenomenal cook. So I got my love of cooking from her, but as far as agricultural kind of zeal from my grandparents. So
yeah. Well, it sounds like in some ways then your grandmother was really the impetus because she was such an awful cook.
Yes, actually, candidly, I used to joke about that. I must have been 7 or 8 years old. I remember pestering my parents that I wanted to go vegetarian, and this was way before people were really, vegetarian was not a hot thing to do, nor would an 8-year-old really be looking at that. I would think it's pre-social media time. But I remember being so gung-ho, like, I want to be vegetarian. I don't really want to eat meat, probably because my grandmother was so terrible at cooking it. But I also just I knew my body wasn't really leaning towards that. So my mother's a great cook, but she's like, I'm not cooking a separate meal just for you. So you got to learn how to cook on your own before you can go vegetarian. So, yeah. So I, as an 8-year-old, I'm like, I can make spaghetti. It's probably not a healthy way to live. So I chose not to go vegetarian at 8, but I remember it distinctly as a little kid being like, I'm drawn to this.
Right. So if you didn't go vegetarian at 8, how old were you when you decided to make the leap?
So it's funny. I went vegetarian at 14, actually off of a bet. I went to a boarding school for high school, and I was playing competitive ultimate frisbee, and we were training for the season. And a friend of mine, I don't know how we got on the topic, but we're like, oh, being vegetarian is going to help our performance. So we're gonna do this. And basically we made a bet to see who could be vegetarian longer. It very quickly turned into veganism for me within a couple months. And at the time too, it was really digging into understanding the food system and actually getting very mad at the United States for where our food was and the quality of the food that we're consuming. So I pretty quickly felt much better being vegetarian and then vegan. So it was just kind of a natural progression, but it started with a bet, actually.
Did you happen to win that bet?
I think I did. Yeah. I think she caved quite quickly, and I was purely vegan for over a decade. So I would say I won that one. I didn't win anything but my health.
So you say that as you started to kind of research and look into kind of our food system in the United States, you got a little bit disgruntled.
Right.
Can you specifically say what were some of the things that you were upset about? Was it how it was produced, processed, distributed?
It was a myriad of pretty much everything, honestly. At the time, I think The Omnivore's Dilemma had just come out. And Michael Pollan is a great writer to begin with, and kind of opened my eyes as a 15-year-old to like understanding how much there is that we need to know about our food before it even hits our plates or hits our grocery store. So for me, it was an environmental portion, that our food is traveling way farther than it really should be. At the time, I was really interested also in understanding agricultural history. So looking at like Silent Spring in the 70s and 80s, kind of the Green Revolution. So for me, it was realizing the monocropping that was happening or that had happened, and understanding how that was degenerating our soil. So for me, it was mostly environmentalism that really throttled me to get so pissed off. Candidly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty, that seems pretty precocious for a 14, 15, 16-year-old to be, doing that kind of research and coming to those kind of conclusions. Good for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, my mother liked to say I was 8 going on 32. So I can only imagine what age I was going on as a teenager. So let's dive into, so college, for whatever reason, wasn't for you, right? And I think it's great that you were insightful enough to realize, what, this is not, for me, it's just not my path. But it sounds like you knew that maybe culinary school was. Yeah. And so what did that path look like, and where did you go to school? So I went to a private boarding school for high school, and I actually spent a semester up in Maine working on an organic farm. It was called Chewonki back in the day. I think it's just called Maine Coast Semester now, but really focused on ecology. And I've kind of found my independence there, and recognizing that even high school wasn't really for me. So I went to college a year early. And the college I went to was Bard College at Simon's Rock. Great school. I ended up working in a restaurant in Great Barrington called Allium. I was the prep cook, garde manger, pastry. They put me on whatever, and made fun of me for being vegan, but we lived through all those times as a vegan in the culinary industry. I loved my classes there. Liberal arts is amazing, and I'm an avid learner, but for me, it was like, that's not where I see my career going. So I decided after a year there that I would transfer to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. So I transferred over to New York. So
you went to the culinary school, and how long was that? And did you enjoy it?
Yeah, so it's the acronym is the CIA, or the Culinary Institute of America, which is funny. If you say it too quickly, people think you're part of the government. I'm like, it's very different. I loved it. It was, I love my alma mater. They were great. I went there for my associates and my bachelor's and stayed on as a TA. I did go through the program completely vegan, so I worked off of sight, touch, and smell, which is very different than what most people do going through culinary school. And for me, I didn't have a problem working with animal products because it was, as somebody who wanted to be a professional chef, I knew I would have to cook for people who were not vegan. So I was okay with that process, but I just didn't feel right about consuming it myself at the time. And so I learned how to cook in a very different way. Unless it was vegan, then obviously I would taste it. But it was amazing. Tons of information, really great people. But I will say that there were some challenges. A lot of the chef instructors actually were great about it and understanding. Some of my classmates actually were not so much. I'm sure they are now, but back then, over 10 years ago, I mean, it was a different time period where people like, well, what do you do? Or like, what do you eat? I'm like, well, I photosynthesize. What do you think I do? It was a different time as far as plant-based eating or vegan cooking. So I did a little bit of harassment there, but it was a different part of the industry, different time in the industry. So I think things are finally changing, which is great to see.
We have photosynthesize, or, you could also tell me you were a breatharian and you get this nectar drip going in the back of your brain.
I like it.
Just from the air. Yes.
Exactly. Just nourishing myself with sensors.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Why not? Well, we can completely change human anatomy and overnight, right? No, it was great exposure. I think there's definitely something to be said about learning classical culinary techniques. At the same time, even when I was a student, I'm like, there's so many cool things we could do with vegetables that back then, like, it wasn't a part of the curriculum. So it was stuff that I worked on the side. I worked for a vegan food delivery service when I was in school. So I was still trying to find my way in plant-based cooking outside of culinary school, but also in culinary school and getting those foundations. So I enjoyed it. It was just a very different time in my life, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, I'm finding this to be really fascinating. That you were able to navigate the CIA using, as you said, sight, touch, and smell, and not tasting it, just because you wanted to hold true to your beliefs regarding veganism. I think that's really, really cool. And so how long was that CIA? Was that 2 years?
Yeah, so the associates is 2 years, and then the bachelor's program afterwards is 2 more years. I did take a hiatus for a year and moved to Germany and worked in the wine world. Which, being vegan in Germany is also an interesting process. I think it's also still a little bit, it's probably different now, but back in 2012, it was still a little difficult to find items, but beyond tofu, if you wanted to find, something besides raw veggies and lentils and grains, which are amazing and what I subsisted off anyway. But it was a little sometimes monotonous with what I could purchase. But I was also on a very raw budget because I was an unpaid intern. So
now, did you get your master's in food studies?
Yeah. So I, after my undergrad, I stayed on as a sort of a teaching assistant or a manager in training. And then I decided to go to New York University for my master's. So the master's program is in food studies, an MA. And they kind of had two different tracks. Either you focused on culture or food systems. And at the time in my life, I was really focused on the cultural side of it. Systems are obviously a big part of my kind of personal history and something I really love to explore too. But I felt like at that point in my life, I'd explored it, maybe not enough because there's still so much more I could learn about it, but I really wanted to focus on the cultural side. So that's what I really leaned into.
And Am I correct? Are you working on your doctorate right now?
Yeah. So for somebody who didn't think college was for them, apparently I've become a lifelong
Yeah.
student. So I'm working on my EDD, which is a doctorate in higher education leadership. I just defended a few weeks ago, but I have a little bit more coursework to do, which is different than a PhD track, which kind of does coursework first and then your dissertation and all that good stuff. But yeah, my research is heavily focused on looking at institutional initiatives addressing food insecurity. So from a higher education lens, without it being too technical, basically I interviewed a bunch of administrators who run basic needs programs to understand kind of what their processes are like and what their lived experiences are.
So when you say food insecurity at higher education, are you
Mhm.
talking about all the starving students that are living on ramen noodles?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about. I think, at least when I was going through my undergrad, it was kind of this, everyone was a starving student. That was the normal, like it was normalized, and it shouldn't be normalized because you can't function when you're not being nourished. Like there's no way you can be academically set. I mean, there's ways to be academically successful, but it's substantially more difficult to do anything if you're malnourished.
Yeah.
And we've kind of decided as a culture that, you're in college for a short period of time, so you can kind of grit through it with free pizza and ramen noodles, but it's not true. It's also people still have an idea that higher ed is predominantly students coming straight out of high school, and we have substantially more non-traditional students than we've ever had in higher ed. So most of them are financially independent, and it's become even more severe, and we're not talking about it enough. So I'm talking about it more.
Yeah. Well, it sounds kind of like, the way medical students just seems to be the rite of passage that you go through medical school and you get, or I should say, maybe internship and residency, and you get abused and you're sleeping 3, 4, 5 hours a night and just these insane schedules. Kind of maybe similar with, some students going to college and really not fueling themselves in the best way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so a couple of years back, I ran a teaching kitchen on an organic farm in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we used to do mindfulness retreats for some of the medical students that are at University of Cincinnati. And so my portion was always focused on the kitchen side. So we'd always talk with the med students about, that kind of that triangle of like, you got to sleep, you have to eat, but you also have to do school. And sometimes people obviously you only choose 2, not 3, which I think is crazy, but it's kind of one of those, we all have a good chuckle at it, but it's almost not right. Actually, it's not right. But at the same time, a lot of med students don't necessarily know that, they're living on a budget as interns or, as medical students, and they're going to have patients and clients that go through that same thing. And if they don't know how to feed themselves as med students, how are they going to advocate for their patients and clients years later?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. We'll get right back to the delicious chat that I'm having with Chef Stephanie. But first, let's dig into the mailbag for another PLANTSTRONG proof letter that I received several months ago from a gentleman named John. And John writes, "Dear Rip and the Esselstyn family, I wanted to take a moment and thank you for helping me turn my life around. I have lost over 50 pounds in 9 weeks. I just had my annual checkup and lab work, and both my doctor and I were amazed. I am off Valsartan for high blood pressure, and it's actually a little on the low side now. No more Pravastatin, no more Zetia, and no more stomach pills for indigestion. My lab results are living proof of this incredible 9-week journey thus far. On behalf of myself, my wife, and my daughter, thank you, Rip." All I got to say is congrats, John. Way to take the kale by the stalk and make it happen. It is beyond rewarding to hear from listeners like you who have taken the good news about plant-based nutrition and put it to work for them. And speaking of titrating off meds like John was able to do, I want you to know, if you're on meds, one of the great benefits of attending one of our immersion retreats is having our incredible medical team on hand to monitor our guests as they transition to eating only whole plants. And it is remarkable how quickly the human body can heal itself when fueled the right way. And in as little as 3 or 4 days, we often are adjusting medications and sending our guests home with a note for their providers. If you'd like to take part in one of our retreats, we only offer them twice a year. Our next event will be in Sedona, Arizona from October 10th to the 15th. Visit the show notes or our website, plantstrong.com, for all the details. We'd love to have you join us. Let's talk about Escoffier.
Yeah.
So when was it that you landed at Escoffier, and when did they introduce this terrific plant-based culinary program?
Yeah, so I started at Escoffier May of 2020, so basically at the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah. Lovely time to shift a little bit in my career, which is great. I have been working on, originally I was a subject matter expert for developing some of the courses for the plant-based program, but we officially launched it in July of 2021. So we've had students since July of 2021 in the plant-based program, but it's been under development for a couple of years. So I kind of came in at the right time, and they so happen to find out that I have some plant-based experience. At least I would hope that I do, and have been, working on making sure that we've got a really robust program that helps students be successful in their career and understand it from a plant-based lens rather than a more traditional route, just because, at least for me, that was amazing to be a part of, because it's what I wanted as a culinary student, and I never had that opportunity.
Well, I would imagine that most of the students that are going through the program are able to see it, touch it, smell it, and taste it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah. It's especially when because our online students, they're cooking in their own homes and taking the photos of their processes so that their chef instructors can give them really detailed feedback on, you did this really well, but let's adjust this, or the consistency was just a little kind of off, so I'm going to have you reduce it more if you ever make this again. So it's really detailed feedback. But yeah, if you're making stuff at your own home, you kind of want to be able to eat it. Otherwise, It's like, yeah.
So you jumped in right at the beginning of the pandemic, mm-hmm. and you guys, I guess, pivoted from all being, live to online. How do you feel the online course is being received? Do you think it's effective for the students?
Yeah, it's interesting because pretty much all of higher ed had to transition online regardless. Yeah. And luckily, Escoffier actually had even pre-plant-based, our culinary and pastry programs were offered online. So we didn't have to pivot nearly as much as a lot of other institutions. And both of our campus, Austin, Boulder, we already had a learning management system. Like, we had stuff in place. So it was much easier for them to transition their on-ground campus students to more of a hybrid or online environment for the time that they needed to do that. I will say online education, like, I'm working my doctorate virtually. My institution is in St. Louis. I am certainly not driving there anytime soon. I will for graduation, but that's pretty much it. So I think it provides a lot of more access and opportunity, which is an amazing thing, because if somebody has dreams to do something with their career, they should be able to find a way to do that. And sometimes higher ed can be cost prohibitive and stop people from actualizing their dreams. So having our online program has actually been very beneficial, because it tends to be a little less expensive than on-ground campuses. Yeah. So, and it's flexible too. So,
how has it been received? Has there been interest in the plant-based program?
Yeah, it's been amazing. We have our first cohort, mighty but many at this point, but they're crushing it. The students are amazing. We have students honestly across the world in our courses. The plant-based program is substantially smaller right now in population size than culinary, but it's really gaining traction. And honestly, the student work is so great to see because they're really diving into it and having a great time. So
that's so fantastic to hear. And I can't think of a better time to be launching, right, a plant-based culinary program. What are you finding is your demographic as far as, male, female, age range, ethnicity? Is there, or is it all over the place?
It's a little all over the place. I will say generally there's a few more females in the plant-based program than males. Also, when you're looking at the demographics of higher ed, they are shifting more female heavy across the board. So it's interesting to kind of see parallels there. Age is all over the place, which is great. We have some students who are, 18 to 20, and we have some students who are in their late 50s. It's really any time is good to go to culinary school, depending on what you want to do with your career. So it's really great to see an expansion of ages. And then, as far as demographics, backgrounds, they're kind of all over the place. But I think that's the coolest thing is that we have such a diverse student population. So,
yeah. So tell me, in doing my research, I saw that, and help me again, his name is Auguste.
Auguste Escoffier.
Auguste Escoffier. He's considered the founder of modern cooking. That's a pretty good title right there.
Right?
And he's basically like established the basics in culinary when it comes to innovating techniques and methodologies and foods. And so how long has Escoffier been around? Do you know when the cooking school was like founded?
Yeah. So as far as our online program and our programs have been around for a little over 8 years now. So as far as an online school, we actually have a long history, which is awesome. Auguste Escoffier himself obviously is much longer, and there's an amazing legacy. So we're trying to do him justice. He's kind of known as the king of chefs or the chef of kings. Is
he dead? Is he alive?
He's passed away at this point. It's been a few years, but his family's legacy is phenomenal. And we're very blessed to kind of have his family's blessing to use his name, which is such an honor because of the role he's played in the culinary industry. There are a lot of predominant chefs who have impacted the industry greatly, but Escoffier is one of the biggest. When we talk about foundational culinary techniques, he was kind of a part of it. Helped kind of craft the brigade system, which is how most restaurants are run. So he's kind of the who's who when it comes to long-term chefs. So it's an honor to have the school named after him. So
in my take on it is chefs are just gluttons for punishment. It seems like no, literally, it seems like you work insane hours. You get up, I don't know, 4:30 in the morning. Unless you go out and get to meet the customers, you're not getting kind of, the slaps on the back and the, way to go. It just seems like an absolutely brutal profession. Why do you think people go into it, and what are they trying to get out of it? I love cooking, but I don't think I could do what you guys do.
It's funny. I think there are a handful of different reasons why people become chefs or want to become chefs. I do remember, even as a kid, I mused about having restaurants. I certainly do not want a restaurant now. It's the financial equity on it now. But for me, the pull was honestly nourishing other people and cooking for other people, and this really impacting their life in a way that I otherwise couldn't. Which you have to have kind of perspective that like you are impacting other people's lives. Because if you're in a kitchen where you're not seeing the customers, that there are open kitchens. I've worked in plenty of open kitchens. I've worked in front of the house just as much as the back of the house, candidly. So I've had those client guest experiences, but you don't always get them. And, some people don't actually, they're more driven by the creativity of the food and connecting with the food and creating something that calls to them and they get to play. I will say there's a lot of really hard work, but we play pretty hard too. So I think for a lot of people, that's how they kind of get into this profession, is because they find a flow, they find something they're really good at. And there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of careers with a lot of stress, but as chefs, we have long hours, we're on our feet all the time. You might have a distributor that doesn't bring you anything of what you ordered because of a shortage or because something got messed up and now you have to figure out everything, or a refrigerator goes down and all your food is gone. Somebody calls off and now you're washing dishes, but also doing orders. Things happen literally all the time, but some people like that dynamicism that comes with it.
Yeah.
Always being on your toes. So, will say we're kind of a special bunch of people that,
I bet you really are a special breed. No doubt about it. But I like what you said there about, doing it because you really inherently, you want to nourish people. I think also you get, if you're creative, it's probably a great creative outlet. It allows you to flex your creative muscles in a way that's very maybe unique to your personality. Right.
Right.
And I know just from working with Derek and Chad Sarnow, who are both great plant-based chefs, they both have their own, kind of style and different plant-based foods they love to work with and get attached with. So you're always innovating, you're always learning. I mean, that seems very, very exciting. Yeah,
it is. It's one of the industries that you can become stagnant, obviously, like with anything else. But I think that's the greatest thing for most chefs, is that there's always something to tweak. There's always something to play with. There's more ingredients to expose yourself to. There's different ways to play with an ingredient that you've always worked with. So there's always something more to learn. And that's candidly one of the most common sayings we have at Escoffier when we're talking to our students is it's not about perfection, it's progression. And even as chef instructors, we're always trying to progress because none of us are perfect and none of us know all the answers. Most people find that the more you find out, the less you know. So I like to think that's a big part of being a chef too, is knowing that you will never know everything about food and playing around with it. So,
well, I think that what you just said is so true in just about everything in life. Yeah. Keeps us on our toes always. So I want to fire some questions at you. Kind of put you on the spot a little bit here. So what are some, for our listeners that are out there that are either, deep into plant-based or just getting into plant-based, what would you say are some basic cooking utensils, tools that, almost every kitchen should have?
Definitely cutting board, a sharp chef knife. Make sure to have both a honing steel and sharpening stone. Most people do not know how to sharpen knives, and generally speaking, that's when you cut yourself, is when you have a dull knife. And generally, people don't have those, and then you have the knives you've had in your house for a decade that like start bending and warping, and they're not good for anything, especially root veggies. Nobody wants to cut a celeriac with a dull knife. It's terrible. So cutting board knife, honestly, you do not need 10,000 knives. You just need a good one, maybe a paring knife and a bread knife. As a chef, I have tons of knives. I have a cleaver that I bought in Dusseldorf, Germany for €3 that I will never give up, but you don't need it. You just need a sharp knife. I would say definitely a really good saute pan.
What kind of pan? Do you have a particular pan you recommend? Do you like cast iron? Do you like green pans? What do you think?
Yeah, I like green pans just because there's so many things that people could line your pans with, and at some point they start to deteriorate and we don't really need those in our food. But cast irons are also really great because they're super durable. They take a while for the heat to transfer or kind of warm up the cast iron itself, but it stays hotter longer after it starts to heat up. So
if that's the case, what do you recommend? Do you recommend before you put anything in it, or depending on what you're cooking, you let it sit for like a couple minutes?
Yeah, you don't have to have it for multiple minutes, but definitely preheating a little bit, especially if you're trying to like sear something off. Like if you wanted to sear off a, beautiful piece of tofu, or if you wanted to sear, I don't know why I'm thinking about rutabaga right now, but it's still kind of winter here. So if you wanted to sear some rutabaga and you wanted that beautiful sear on it, like if it's not hot, it's not going to do anything. You're just going to,
right,
steam it. It's just not the point. So yeah, heating up a cast iron can definitely help get you to where you need to be. I think a good set of bowls can be very beneficial. You don't have to go crazy with all of the gadgets in the world, but for plant-based, I love my Vitamixer or high-speed blender just because there's so many awesome sauces you can make with soaked cashews or soaked macadamia nuts, and it just gives it such a beautiful, delicate consistency. So I would say for me, a blender is definitely a go-to, but you don't need 5 of them. I feel like some people get kind of aggressive with what they acquire. Simple is better.
So I don't know how much you know about kind of the PLANTSTRONG philosophy, but we're not particularly fans of adding oils when we cook.
Yeah.
We try and do low sodium, low sugar, always, when we can, whole grains. So just to give you a little background on that, but I am not a fan of eggplant. So could you create an eggplant dish that I would like?
So eggplant can be finicky because depending on the time in which you harvest eggplant, also the varietal, some of them are more bitter. So let me ask you, what do you not like about eggplant?
The texture. It's rubbery, it's styrofoamy. I find it frankly to be kind of tasteless. And I've never. There's maybe one time when I had one of those thin purple Chinese eggplants.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
But it also, if I'm gonna like an eggplant, it needs to be cooked. It's like a mushroom, like a portobello mushroom. Yep. It needs to be really cooked and get all that water out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, like the longer Japanese style eggplants, they're going to have a different flavor than like the big globe Italian eggplant. So knowing there's some amazing Thai eggplants that are smaller, so they all have different flavors to it. And honestly, when you have eggplants that have kind of grown too far, they get really big seeds. They start to get bitter. They're also kind of bloated a little bit more water. So, so picking the right eggplant can go a long way to begin with. From there, I would say if you're not particularly a fan of the texture, actually roasting them whole over an open fire can be really great because you char off the exterior, it steams the inside, and you can puree it into really beautiful sauces or spreads. Like basically that's the base of baba ganoush. Yeah. So it's luscious. It becomes nice and creamy, really lovely, and can pair really well with I like tahini. It's kind of heavier on the fat side, but it blends really well with some lemon juice and tahini, some garlic as well. And it's just a beautiful spread. So,
I think I would like that. I definitely do. Yeah.
Awesome.
I like that idea about roasting it on the fire, taking out the inside, doing a little baba ganoush or some other sauce. That's great. Yeah.
That way, because I candidly, I have had undercooked eggplant. It's like, it's not pleasant. It's just not the right way to do it.
Well, are you a fan of eggplant, squashes, mushrooms?
Yeah, I am. It's funny for me. I'm kind of particular with eggplant as well. Like I'll take smaller eggplants or like the Japanese longer style eggplants, cut them in half and slice them kind of on a bias so that they have kind of a grid, and then do a miso and maple glaze and roast it like that. So that it's got kind of this sweet umami unctuousness to it. And then if you roast it long enough too, it gets kind of nice and supple. So it's not that rubbery, plasticky type of texture. So for me, that's a great way that I like eggplant besides roasted. Summer squash, I love during the summer. This is obviously not the right time of the season for me. And candidly, when I have it, when it's undercooked, it actually doesn't make me feel great. So I kind of avoid dishes where it's just gently sauteed. But my grandmother also used to like cook squash until it was decimated. So I try to find a nice happy medium in my life nowadays.
What do you like? Acorn, butternut, kabocha? You got a favorite squash?
So winter squash, I love winter squash.
Huh?
You know, butternut is kind of ubiquitous. Like you can find it everywhere. And you can do so much with it. Like I love making risotto with some roasted butternut squash. I'll puree some of it to get it kind of that creamy lusciousness to go along with the starches releasing from the arborio rice. But then I'll take cubed pieces of butternut squash as well. So you get the creaminess of it, but then you also get kind of the beautiful roasted notes, and top it with some toasted pumpkin seeds or something like that. You could also arguably harvest the seeds from the butternut squash, but that's kind of a long drawn out process. So usually that's not my evening, my, midweek meal, but butternut squash I love just because it's how prevalent it is. But Capota is great. A slightly different texture. It's a little, I find, kind of deeper in flavor. It's not just at like that sweet initial note to it. So Hubbard squashes too, really beautiful texture.
Hubbard squash isn't a Hubbard squash. Is that similar to a kabocha or just a pumpkin in general?
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's a little bit more, I find it to be more dense. It's denser. Also, the skin is quite thick, so it's kind of a hassle to harvest. But it's a little bit hardier, I would say. Yeah.
Let's move on to just plain old rice. Do you have a favorite rice that you like to cook with? Short grain, long grain, basmati?
It kind of depends on what I'm cooking it with, because I'm generally not just eating rice. I like it with lentils or some beans or something like that. So, if I'm going for something like a pilaf method, which usually is a little bit of oil at the beginning, you arguably can do it without oil, but it helps protect some of the grains. You don't have to go crazy about that though. And then basically add just enough liquid for rice. It would be a 1-to-2 ratio. Bring it up to simmer, cover it, and they become nice and light and fluffy. It reminds people of like biryani from Indian cooking. Or, short grain rice is great for making risotto if you've got arborio. Or, I do like making sushi every once in a while. So going for short grain there. It just depends what I'm using the grains for. I personally really like working with other grains like millet and farro, just because there's so many other flavors and textures there. So I like to expand beyond rice, but depends on the rice dish.
No, I hear you. So let's expand beyond the rice. Yeah. So you mentioned farro and millet. Let's amaranth. Barley. Do you have a favorite, or it just depends upon the dish again?
Seriously depends. I'm so mood dependent. It's terrible when people are like, what's your favorite dish to cook? And I'm like, well, it depends on who I'm cooking for. So but I will say, in the Cincinnati area that I'm in right now, you can actually find some local wheat berries. So if you can find local grains, that's an amazing way, to contribute to your community and also reduce the length of, distance that your food is traveling. And it's really awesome to have local grains. So here I can usually find wheat berries. So that's really great. And sometimes during the summer I can get nixtamal, or basically, why am I blanking on the term right? Basically, corn for making like tamales and things like that. So apparently my brain is just kind of out, but
no. Have you ever been to the Chef's Garden?
I have.
You have. Yeah.
It's amazing. Farmer Lee is amazing. Yeah.
Farmer Lee, it's this amazing regenerative farm outside of Cleveland, Ohio, about 1.5 miles from the shores of Lake Erie.
Yep.
The soil there is just phenomenal, and the different produce they're growing there is spectacular.
Right.
Yeah, we've done some things with them. So speaking of the chef's garden, they grow some really incredible green leafies, all kinds of different kales and Swiss chards and arugula. Do you have a favorite green leafy? Is it the mood again?
It's the mood. It's the mood. It's like, which way is the sun pointing right now? I honestly, if I had to go to a fallback, I would say lacinato kale is something I always come back to just because of the consistency. I also like the depth of flavor and the texture more than regular kale, but I've worked on many farms, so if I can get my hands on some good beet greens or some Swiss chard, especially rainbow chard, I'm not going to pass it down. I love my greens. So, sweet potato greens. Not very common, but sweet potato greens kind of work a little bit like spinach. And they're really fun to work with. So,
wow, sweet potato greens. I don't know if I've ever had sweet potato greens, so that'll be interesting to try that. Yeah. One of the things they did I think they called it an ice spinach. That it had a really high sugar content because of the time of the year that it was grown and the temperatures. And it was like no spinach I've ever tried before. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think they just call it ice spinach, but basically they're growing the spinach and it freezes and thaws. So basically it helps with that Brix content. It's almost like making wine where the later you harvest the grapes, the more Brix content it has. So yeah, it's so fascinating that they're able to do that with spinach and basically create something that very few of us have ever experienced in our lives. So I'm so glad that you got to experience that.
Oh yeah. And in fact, last night, it was my birthday and
belated birthday.
Thank you. And we actually, for dinner, we had a great mulligatawny soup and we had we had a wild rice, and then our side was blackened broccoli in the cast iron skillet with just some like garlic granules, onion granules, red chili flakes, a little bit of salt and pepper. And then I threw in at the last 3 minutes, some finely diced up dinosaur kale, awesome. Right? With the stem. And I adored it. But my wife was like, it's just a little too bitter for me. I'm like, I love this. I think it's so much better than just plain old curly kale. Yeah.
Bitterness can get people though. Like I will say, especially in my later teens, I love the idea of broccolini. I love it now, but back then my palate was just like, that's too bitter. Like even radicchio was like, I can't, see palates change over the years, but that was really difficult for me for many years. But trial and error.
What about arugula? You like the rocket lettuce?
I love arugula. I like it more when it's baby arugula, though. It's not as peppery. I do like the peppery note, but sometimes the larger arugula leaves can be really aggressive, and it's hard to balance that out as a composed dish. I will say dandelion greens are fabulous, though. Like if you can get dandelion greens in season, delicious. They're a little bit more bitter. Traditionally, and I don't recommend people do this just like on a whim, but you can actually harvest the dandelion roots and make them into a beautiful tea. It's pretty anti-inflammatory, which is awesome. But yeah, it's not something to go in your backyard and find your dandelions and rip them up. You'll have a lot of holes in your backyard, but B, it's much more of a process than that. That was very simplified, but dandelion greens are awesome during the season. So
yeah, I know whenever I am short on time and I want to get a quick meal, we in Austin here, we just had sweet greens that came in. There's a couple of locations, and I always, as my base, I always get arugula. I get a huge bunch of arugula. I just love it. Yeah. All right. I'm going to put you on the spot again. So we're going to go to your local fire station. We're going to cook for the guys and the gals that work there. Typically very meat heavy, right? Meat and potatoes type diets usually for these people, these firefighters. You're going to cook them up something that hopefully is going to wow their palates and get them to be really interested in plant-based. It probably needs to have a bit of, an umami backbone to it. What are you going to make for these guys and gals?
my Candidly, my father's a firefighter. He's retired now, but
Wow.
he was a firefighter in West Hartford, Connecticut for 25 plus years. So I'm kind of used to the fact that he's a very safe eater.
Safe.
I did not get my love of expanding my palate from my father. I love him for many other things, but his food prowess is not one of those. But you know, I'm so used to hearing stories about like lasagnas and just very carb meat heavy dishes, barbecue, things like that. But
Meatloaf,
you know, well, you're feeding the whole station. It's an undertaking and it's a whole process. I mean, so you know, I kind of have to lean into my Polish heritage and I would do sweet potato pierogi. It's a little bit different than a traditional pierogi, but really still hearty enough because I mean, being a firefighter is an intense job and there's, somebody's on watch in the middle of the night, like everybody's system is all out of whack. So I would probably go with pierogi with some caramelized onions, probably do a big whole grain salad on the side with a bunch of greens in it. Probably go for like a lemon vinaigrette just to bring some brightness into it. And then, round it out with some brownies. You got to make sure to have like something kind of homey. So it's not too estranged, especially for people who may not be used to plant-based cooking. You got to find that middle ground, get them to think about it, but not freak them out.
do you make a good plant-based brownie?
I do. So I have a couple of different versions. One is pretty coconut oil heavy, so not really great for Plant Strong, but I do like doing one with roasted sweet potatoes because it adds a gentle sweet note to it and it actually gives it more of that fudgy note to it. Yeah. So I do one with roasted sweet potato puree, flaxseed meal, dark cocoa powder. Usually I melt in non-dairy chocolate as well. So yes.
Do you think you could share that with us and we could include
absolutely
that in the show notes for this podcast?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that would be fantastic. Let's plan on doing that.
Perfect.
So you mentioned your father was a firefighter. Did you say it was East Hartford?
West Hartford.
West Hartford. Actually, that's where my brother lives now.
Awesome.
Where is he because of your kind of passion for plants? Is he plant-based? Is he and your mother or?
Yeah. So my dad, grew up with my grandmother who doesn't know really how to cook very well. So, I mean, he's very utilitarian about eating. So he's grown a lot, I think probably due to the fact that I'm in the hospitality industry, where I remember must have been like, 15, 16 at the time. We went to a Japanese restaurant and he's like, I don't know what to do. So he's a very safe eater still. So he still consumes animal products, but he's definitely expanded his palate. Him and his wife, his wife actually has diabetes. So she's very particular about her diet as well. So that they lean more. They do more plant-based now, but they are certainly not plant-based.
Yeah.
I can't attribute that. My mother, she very much is very plant forward. She's a big foodie. But yeah, I got my love of cooking from her, but she and I have different eating patterns still. So
got it.
Yeah. So
got it. Let's talk mangoes. Do you like mangoes?
I love mangoes. Sometimes they can be a little stringy, so you got to find the right one that's nice and ripe, but super luscious. I love the consistency. You can do so many different things with mango.
You can. Do you have a favorite way of like cutting a mango, peeling a mango, serving?
Yeah. So I know some people like to do the crosshatch and scoop it out. Personally, what I like to do is, have the mangoes have that oblong shape. So you cut the top and the bottom off. And I use a knife just to peel the exterior. Because sometimes if you've got a peeler, it kind of locks up on the skin. So I just try to get super close because I don't want to take too much off of the mango. Exactly. I'm like,
it's orange gold.
Right, exactly. So I use my chef's knife and just work around the mango that way after cutting the flat surface. And then from there, you can actually see the kind of the oblong seed from the top, and then you cut around the seed. So you're trying to maximize. And typically, I don't do this if I'm serving other people, but if I'm at home and I've got the core of the mango, you just kind of gnaw on it a little bit. So you get the core part of the mango.
So I posted on my Instagram channel a couple days ago how to kind of peel a mango with your hand. So I cut it along the seed, and then I take it and I go along the outside, and then I just peel it back. Right.
I love it. And
it's like this great, almost, pear of a huge chunk. And I love snacking on that. As opposed to these little cubes, that you do like, Martha Stewart style, and then turn it inside out and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Yeah.
But I had all these responses, and I had several people say, "Oh, I just eat the skin and all." I mean, have you ever heard of people eating mango skin?
You can. I find that it makes my tongue fuzzy, and I don't particularly care for the texture. Also, you do want to think about like what are the growing processes of that mango. So
right.
Usually the peel is a protection layer for a reason, but you can. I'm not saying anybody can't, but when we were
growing up, we got introduced to mangoes probably when I was in my teens, and my brother, we would just like go to town on making sure we got every little last bit. And he started getting basically this red rash all around his mouth, and we couldn't figure out what it was from. And my father finally said, "You know what? We've been eating a lot of mangoes, and it is a close cousin to poison ivy. So you're having a reaction to that." And that's exactly what it was.
Yep. It's funny how I loved pineapples. I still love pineapples, but I would eat so much. You get the prickly tongue and stuff like that. Arguably, like some people will actually eat the peel of pineapple, which I find that's very rough. So I would hope most people choose to take that off. But I think about it like people eating the skin of the mango, kind of like kiwi. You technically can.
Yeah.
But why would you? So, but that's my opinion. If somebody enjoys it, I'm not going to stop them from enjoying their food.
I actually have enjoyed eating the skin of the kiwi, but the mango is a whole nother beast for sure. All right. I have a kind of a decision for you to make. So if I'm going to say, Stephanie, you've got to eat one of three things: 2 eggs, however you want to prepare them, a piece of skinless chicken breast, or 2 ounces of cheddar cheese, and you had to pick one, what would it be? Or could you just not do it?
If I had to pick, there's so many, like the chicken is absolutely out. Chicken and the texture and just the processes. I mean, there are ways to like raise chicken that's more humane and but that's generally not the chicken breast.
I want to hear your thoughts out loud. So okay, that's how.
So for chicken, I mean, like I worked on an organic farm, and they were not plant-based. They had amazing produce, and I really highlighted that. But they had great regenerative agriculture, so they really focused on having very sustainable processes and humane processes for their animals. Still, chicken is just like the texture. I mean, there's great ways to cook it, but it's just not. If I had to ever choose a non-plant-based item, that would not be it. So that one's out. The eggs, I think it would really depend on where the eggs are coming from, just because like they're mass-produced eggs, and same thing with dairy too. It's just like such a minefield of terrible practices, and unlike cheddar cheese, it kind of depends on the dairy, and then we're waiting to see where they're cheddaring this cheese, and so for me it's like this long drawn process. So I think ultimately, I think I would choose the cheddar just because it's at least been fermented in a way.
You can maybe you could throw it into your roasted sweet potato brownies.
Just shred them in. Just get that sharp cheddar flavor in there.
Yeah. All right. So do you find eating plant-based is expensive or economical?
It depends on how you eat plant-based. It really, I think a lot of people go, I can't be plant-based. I can't be vegan because it's too expensive. And it's like, well, what are you choosing to eat? Mm-hmm. Because generally speaking, if you're going for whole foods, they're not that expensive, especially if you buy in bulk and especially if you're buying raw ingredients and you're not buying prepackaged items. When you start going into prepackaged or very heavily prepared items, that's when it gets expensive. Although nuts are expensive, I will say that. Like the cashews are a pretty penny sometimes. So it really just depends on the items. Like lentils are cheap. They're delicious. They're filling. You can make a lot of portions for very small price point. That being said, if you're buying a ton of mangoes, if you're getting, exotic fruits and vegetables, it's going to rack up. So it really depends on how you go about it. I would say it's economical, but that's also me knowing the prices of food. And arguably, I would still say, regardless of if the produce is expensive or not, it's cheaper in the long run for your health.
Totally. So, yeah, I love telling people that, potatoes, beans, bananas, frozen fruit, frozen veggies can be, really the most economical and healthy way to eat on the planet. Right. And it's not going to break your wallet. It really shouldn't. Where do you shop? You shop anywhere in particular?
I kind of shop around. It depends on what I'm looking for. In the area that I'm in, Kroger is one of the larger grocery stores. Back on the East Coast, obviously, Stop and Shop was the big to do. Candidly, Whole Foods has some really great products. Around here, we have a market called Fresh Time, which has some pretty good produce. I also still like to buy directly from farmers. We have a cool kind of like food hub that you can order online, and they aggregate it from local farmers. It's kind of more of a process, but it's much easier to buy from farmers nowadays than it ever has been before. So it's a beautiful thing having the internet and delivery. So it depends on what I'm looking for. Post-doctorate, I'm hoping to grow a little bit more myself too, to cut down on how much I'm purchasing outside of that. But right now, I don't have enough time or I don't feel like I have the time to allocate towards nurturing little,
So we're winding down here. I just got a couple more questions for you. Hang in there. You're doing amazing. So if we're trying to really cut back on our sodium, and we tell people, you really got to be careful about all the packaged, boxed, and canned goods. But let's say at home, we don't want to use much sodium when we're cooking. Do you recommend any spices or any ways of really enhancing the flavor without using excessive amounts of sodium?
Yeah. So it's, when you're cutting down on, not all canned items are evil or anything like that, but generally speaking, if you have canned items like canned beans tend to be high in sodium. So if you're buying dried beans and soaking them yourself, A, it's cheaper. B, you're cutting down on sodium. So minimizing how much you're eating that's processed or has gone through some type of processing will absolutely help. When it comes to spices, absolutely. Salt is only, and there are other ways that we get sodium, but our palate is much more than just salt and sugar. We've got acidity, we've got umami, we've got that, umami, that savory note. So in bitterness, so they all can interplay and they kind of dance on our palate and on our tongue. So infusing, different spices, whether or not you want something warming. So maybe something like cumin and cinnamon. You can certainly still have a little bit of salt in there, but it's going to give it so much more flavor than just be like, I'm just going to season it with salt and black pepper. Yeah. That's fine, but it's very bland at the end of the day. Where, if you're adding in smoked paprika, then you get that beautiful smoky note and that kind of fruitiness from the pepper. You can go for turmeric, which is very earthy. But then also thinking about, when you're cooking something, adding some acid at the end brings in some sweetness and also some acidity. So like,
what's some acid? What's some acid that we could bring in? Give me some examples.
Yeah, lime juice, lemon juice. Arguably, you could do something like orange juice, but it's on the sweeter side rather than acidic. You honestly could also do some vinegars, like apple cider vinegar is actually a really great way to finish like cashew-based sauces, just because it gives it more depth. I'm fortunate to have a local vinegar maker in the area as well. So sometimes I'll use some weird vinegars, like there's a corn vinegar that I can buy, or you could make them yourself. I used to ferment a lot, but takes over the house very quickly. But, balancing out spices with also some acidity and thinking about the dish as a whole can help you really pull back on sodium and on salt.
Yeah. What would you say are some spices that should be in every spice cabinet in the plant-based listener that's listening right now?
I would absolutely say cumin, coriander, cinnamon, paprika. I am very particularly fond of smoked paprika. Candidly, it's just a personal preference.
Well, it's the Polish in you.
Yeah, right. Turmeric, definitely need turmeric. Let me see. Dried herbs as well. We can distinguish herbs and spices, but having like some dried thyme, bay leaves, oregano, you can do so many things like dried rosemary. You can really prepare dishes across cuisines with a kind of a small select, like cumin and coriander are used in so many different cultural dishes, and they can taste widely different. Like dishes from Mexico that have cumin and coriander are going to be drastically different than Indian dishes that have cumin and coriander, but they both have it. So having kind of those spices or core spices can really help you kind of expand your horizons when you're cooking at home.
Yeah. I didn't hear garlic or onion. Do you not do that?
I love alliums, garlic. I love scallions, actually. I just don't think of them as dried spices, but they're absolutely used as a flavor base. I use them a lot in my house. I know some people actually avoid alliums, and there's plenty of other ways to kind of introduce flavor bases to building the flavors in a dish. Some people actually will go for, black sea salt. Has kind of a smoky, sulfury note to it. So it's an interesting way, or the Indian spice hing, sometimes has kind of, some people actually think it tastes a little eggy, actually. So it's interesting if you're doing like a scrambled tofu dish, but it can give such an expansive flavor to it as well if you're avoiding alliums and things like that.
What about fenugreek?
I love fenugreek. I don't use it very frequently at my house, candidly, but it's delicious. I also, obviously it's different than fenugreek, but fennel seeds are beautiful. I love that licorice note, though. It's not for everybody. I actually really like dried peppers as well. So I usually have a fair selection of dried peppers to make moles and things like that with. But I don't necessarily think everybody needs that in their house, but I will say it's kind of nice to have a little chili de árbol in the house, some guajillo peppers, because you can do so many different dishes with it.
Now you're just showing off. Now, what about sugars? Because it seems like every 5 years there's a new, it's coconut sugar, it's date sugar, it's blackstrap molasses, it's maple syrup. It's agave nectar. Do you have a favorite that you use kind of across the board, or does it depend on your mood?
This one actually doesn't depend on my mood. It depends on the dish that I'm making. So if I'm baking something, when you think about the chemical structure of that sugar, it can drastically impact the final product. So I will tend to still stick to organic cane sugar. I'm not baking a ton in my life just because it's a lot of sugar. Although arguably making sweets at home is a little bit different than, gorging on pre-processed sweets. But still, so organic cane sugar, but, agave is great because of the lower glycemic index, but then you kind of go into the whole stevia, monk fruit, go on and on and on. Personally, I find stevia a little bitter, so I kind of stay away from that as a sweetener. There are a lot of sweeteners out there, and they all have different flavors. I mean, like coconut sugar is interesting. It's got a depth of flavor. I mean, date sugar is really interesting too, and kind of
that seems to be very popular right now because you're getting basically just pulverized dates with all the fiber and the phytonutrients, antioxidants. It's not so much an empty calorie. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's the thing is like, you have to think about, what are you using that sweetener for? Like, is it just for sweetness, or is there something else you're going to do with it? Growing up on the East Coast, like real maple syrup, not the corn sugar maple flavor stuff. I'm particularly fond of, or even maple sugar, but it wouldn't use it to make my sweet potato brownies. So, but I will say, if I'm making like a chocolate avocado mousse, typically I like to use dates without the seeds, just because of that fiber and that kind of caramel note that they bring to it. It's not great for everything, but there are applications where it makes sense. So I like to use natural sweeteners, but sometimes you got to splurge. So it depends on what I'm making and what it's going to do to that final product. But
yeah, one of our favorite desserts lately at our house is we get these amazing medjool dates from Batiste Farms. They're just like so wet, and they just almost like melt in your mouth. And we take them, we take the seeds out, we kind of cut them in half, put a little dollop of peanut butter in there. And then my kids also put a little bit of dark chocolate chips on top of the peanut butter. And it is just like, decadent and so good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, my first college, Simon's Rock, we used to do a couple friends of mine. We would meet every Tuesday to read out loud together, and we would make peanut butter stuffed dates. Like, that was our thing. I don't know why it was our thing, but it's such a magical treat. I also love dried figs with a little bit of like almond butter in the middle, and you can dip it in like dark chocolate if you wanted to temper it, or you could sans the chocolate as well. But very nice dessert, especially when you have a beautiful dried fruit. So
yeah,
I love it.
So in wrapping up, I want to say, we've been very fortunate in that for our last medical immersion retreat that we had in Sedona, we actually, and you were probably an integral part of this, you guys provided us with 3 Escoffier interns that came and were boots on the ground in the kitchen. It was a total win-win, I think, for both the interns and for us. And this is a relationship that we're building on, and we've got 3 more coming to our Black Mountain retreat just around the corner. But want to thank you for that. And do you call them internships or externships?
So we call them externships. The reason why is because it's external from their culinary learning at the institution. It's kind of weird. It's very common in culinary schools to be called externships, but every other field pretty much does internships. Yeah. Same difference, but externs. Yeah.
So, you said something when I was doing my research that I loved. You said, this is an exciting and vibrant, you said exciting and vibrant plant-based dishes is the wave of the future. And, you don't have to look any farther than 11 Madison Park and what they're doing just to see how this really is. I think if you really want to flex your culinary muscles, plant-based is where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, when we think about the culinary industry, I mean, there's some finesse to searing protein and cooking protein, but there's so much more that goes into preparing beautiful, vibrant, nutrient-dense, plant-based dishes. And honestly, that is, in my opinion, much more of a skill than creating a much more standard American diet plate of like mashed potatoes, probably overcooked steak, maybe some canned green beans. It's just, that doesn't make me hungry. It doesn't make me excited about food, but plant-based cooking does, because there's just so many textures and flavors and ways that you can play with even just a carrot. And it's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, your grandmother would have found that very exciting. Did your grandmother get to see what you've turned into and your
Yeah.
love for food. Is she still alive?
She is still alive. She is struggling a little bit with her memory nowadays. She's back in Connecticut. It's funny because when I started going vegan, she had a hard time accepting it because it was foreign to her that somebody could subsist not on the way she eats food. So I remember her one time, it was a holiday. I think it must've been Christmas or something like that. And I came home I must've been high school, and she turned to me and she goes, "You're still on that diet?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." In my head, I went, "You're still living." So yes, it's true, but I was not that sarcastic with her. But, it's been interesting just because I think she sees me still as a little kid, which is, I think it's very natural for almost everybody. Like when people grow up, you still consider them however you first met them or how they, the different memories. So I think she's proud of where I've grown from. And my father will never tell her this, and I hope she never hears this, but my father one time did say my pierogies were better than hers. So I will take that as the highest compliment. But, she had many kids. She was feeding a lot of people in a very different time period. And at that point, highly processed foods was a marker of modernization and a marker of wealth. So I can't really blame her for, preparing foods in a very different way than what I would consider wealth. But
Yep.
Anyway, I digress.
No, we're in a different time period.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Stephanie, this has been really an absolute joy. Thank you so much for coming on the Plant Strong podcast. If people want to know more about you and Escoffier, if they're interested in taking one of your plant-based courses, where can they go?
They can go to our website. It's www.escoffier.edu. So that's ESCOFFIER.edu. You may be able to find my information on the website. Candidly, we all have faculty bios, so my contact information should be there. But I'm always happy to talk to people about plant-based because it's such a big part of my life. So my email is very long, but Rip, I'm happy to. I think you have it, but we're happy to share. I'm happy to share it. So
okay, we'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm happy to spell it, but it's just going to confuse people. So.
We're good.
Perfect.
Stephanie, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, right back. All right, will you do a closeout with me? Just repeat after me.
Yeah.
Peace. Engine 2. Keep it plant strong. Yeah.
Awesome.
Escoffier has campuses in Boulder, Colorado, and right here in Austin, Texas. But don't fret if you're not in Boulder or Austin. They also have comprehensive online programs as well, including a plant-based culinary arts program. We'll link to that in the show notes on the episode page at plantstrongpodcast.com. We'll see y'all next week, and until then, keep it plant strong. The Plant Strong podcast team includes Carrie Barrett, Lori Kordowich, Amy Mackey, Patrick Gavin, and Wade Clark. This season is dedicated to all of those courageous truth seekers who weren't afraid to look through the lens with clear vision and hold firm to a higher truth. Most notably, my parents, Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn Jr. and Ann Cryle Esselstyn. Thanks for listening.